I'm Merit Janow, Dean of the School of International and Public Affairs at Columbia University. We are very proud to have the Center as one of our premier centers of research and engagement at SIPA. This is, in fact, the 6th annual Global Energy Summit at Columbia University, and we're very excited to welcome you to this full day of discussion and conversation around key issues in global energy policy. And it, of course, features our own experts at SIPA and Columbia University, as well as leaders from around the world. Already this morning, I've had a chance to say hello to people who have come from China, from Europe, from Latin America, and doubtless elsewhere. And for the past 6 years, the Global Energy Summit has served as a gathering for senior energy sector leaders, current and former policymakers, academics, private sector representatives, and many others to share insights and perspectives on the state of play in global energy policy. We know this is an incredibly complex area, an expansive topic, where the intersections are extremely important. The intersections that this center engages are geopolitical, financial, environmental, technology, and much more. And the dynamics are constantly shifting with new sources of tension as well as new opportunities. And opportunities for cutting-edge research and engagement. So I am very pleased to be welcoming you here today. And as you can see, we have a full slate of topics and speakers covering everything from electric vehicles, energy and climate in emerging markets, low carbon transition, cutting-edge research for climate solutions, energy geopolitics, the oil and gas landscape, and the energy and climate policy environment. This is enormously fertile ground, and I think over the course of the day, what has become a community of experts and researchers and policymakers will focus on crucial questions. We have an extraordinary group of featured speakers and panelists, including keynote conversations with Jay Inslee, Governor of the State of Washington, Neil Chatterjee, Chairman of the U.S. Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, Vicki Hollub, President, CEO of Occidental Petroleum, and Heidi Heitkamp, former U.S. Senator from North Dakota. Energy policy is a key field at Columbia and SIPA. We have a degree program in energy and the environment. We have a number of leading faculty who focus on energy and environmental economics. And the Center on Global Energy Policy is an extremely dynamic center expanding its research and engagement in pretty much all of the critical areas facing this enormous field. It's an interdisciplinary platform for data-driven analysis, for convening information sharing, education and training, and in the last couple of years has also started a very engaging podcast, which I would invite you to start listening to if you haven't already. The center and its productivity owes a lot, a tremendous amount, to its founding director, Jason Bordoff, a professor of practice at SIPA, and his remarkable team. So I want to start also by congratulating them on an extraordinary year, already a successful summit. I hope you enjoy your day today. I look forward to your feedback, and please join me in welcoming Jason Bordoff.
Thanks. Good morning, everyone. Really a pleasure to have you all here for, as you heard, the 6th Columbia Global Energy Summit, having expanded now from a half day to a full day. So just to plan your calendars, that gives you a sense. Roughly every 5 years, we're going to double the length of the program. You can plan accordingly. As you heard, at the Center on Global Energy Policy, our mission is to enable leaders in the public sector and in the private sector to make the best possible and more informed choices about the world's most pressing energy issues to deliver a more sustainable and secure energy future. And we do that by leveraging the insights being done here at one of the world's leading academic research institutions, convening around the world, as well as in New York, to deepen our understanding, and through the work we do to teach and train the next generation of leaders. It's hard to imagine a more important time, in my view, to really excel at that mission. Across the board, the energy landscape is being turned on its head. The urgency of the climate change challenge becomes more and more evident every day. The role of the United States is rapidly shifting from the swing of our policy pendulum to our new role as one of the world's major, not only oil and gas producers, but exporters. The pace of change in the energy sector, again, across the board, is accelerating, leading to huge amounts of complexity and uncertainty that are a challenge for the people whose decisions will determine what our energy future look like every day. Policymakers, people in the private sector, many here who are deploying capital every day, helping them understand what's happening. That includes policy uncertainty, geopolitical risk, the pace of technology disruption, the rapidly falling costs of clean energy sources. All of these are becoming more pressing concerns for energy leaders that make it more difficult to plan for the future. And this is all happening in a hyper-polarized political environment that makes it ever harder to find common ground. And so deepening the understanding of these existential questions is the purview of a major research university like Columbia, a school of international and public affairs like SIPA, one that has the capability to study energy across its many facets, environmental and climate, foreign policy and national security, economic, financial, and markets. And that's the work we do at Columbia, at SIPA, and at the Center on Global Energy Policy every day. And as you heard Dean Janow say a minute ago, we're going to get a taste of that today by hearing from a really extraordinary collection of leaders who cover the landscape, from zero-carbon energy to oil and gas, from transportation to electricity, from policy to industry, from the U.S. to Asia to Latin America, India, and much more. It's been a really exciting year of continued growth and success and impact for us at the Center on Global Energy Policy. Produced a steady stream of highly relevant books, articles, reports, op-eds, testified to Congress. Our moderator for the next panel, David Sandelow, will run off after lunch to go testify before the U.S. Senate tomorrow, in fact. We've added some fantastic new researchers to our team, launched some exciting new research initiatives and programs, one on carbon pricing, one on carbon management, carbon capture, sequestration, utilization, direct air capture, and many others. Continue to grow our existing base of programmatic area, including for students. For example, our Women in Energy program, which continues to expand to more and more universities. The weekly podcast Merit Mention that I hope you'll all listen to. And I hope you'll all continue to follow our work on social media and just come visit us at the Energy Center down the street. This kind of activity, the pace of growth that we've enjoyed, the impact that we've had is really only possible because of extraordinary support, including from the leadership here at the university, President Bollinger, our Provost John Coatsworth, our Dean Merritt Janow, and many others. And I also want to thank the many dedicated members of our advisory board who provide ongoing support in many, many ways with their time and advice and resources over the course of the year. One of our board members is not here today, and in fact, his last email to me was the one in which he accepted the invitation to speak on a panel today and would have been speaking on our program today. Like many of you, all of us at the Center on Global Energy Policy were heartbroken this past year by the loss of our friend and colleague and our board member at the Center on Global Energy Policy, Jim Rogers. Many of you know Jim. Jim was a visionary leader in the energy sector, cared deeply about a clean energy transition, cared deeply about issues of energy access, including writing a book on the subject, Lighting the World. As a former journalist very early in his career, he understood the power of good journalism to help develop and inform citizenry on complicated topics like energy. And that's why he funded the energy journalism program that we have created that brings young energy journalists together for a kind of boot camp every summer. And he not only funded that, but he traveled to New York every year to speak to the new class of energy journalists. He was a friend to many of us, taught me a lot. I'm really pleased that his son, Ben Rogers, is here with us this morning. And this year's Global Energy Summit is dedicated in Jim's memory. Before I begin, let me mention a few ground rules. First, please be respectful of our speakers. If you want to have side conversations, please step outside to do that. If you'd like to pose a question, you can do that in two ways. One is on Twitter through the hashtag CGEP events, at Columbia U Energy, and then the hashtag is CGEP Summit 2019. The other way is to do it is to text it to a phone number, 347-621-7399. You won't remember that, but it's in the information on your tables. With that, let me turn to our program. We're going to kick it off with the future of transportation by taking a deep dive into what's next in policy and technology with respect to electric vehicles. And for that, I'm delighted to turn things over to my colleague, the inaugural fellow at the Center, former Undersecretary of Energy and Assistant Secretary of State and Energy, David Sandelow.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Jason. Thank you for your extraordinary leadership of the Center on Global Energy Policy. Thank you, Dean Janow, for your extraordinary leadership of the School of International Public Affairs here at Columbia University. It was not clear to me when we were discussing this program that we could get Columbia students out at 8:30 in the morning for a discussion of energy policy, but looking at the room, it looks like we sure have. And we are going to start today with the discussion of electric vehicles, and we have an extraordinary panel to do that. I'm delighted to welcome to Columbia my friend Tony Posawatz. Tony is currently the CEO of Invictus iCAR. He served as well as CEO of Fisker Automotive, an electric vehicle company. And as a distinguished record at General Motors, he was employee #1 and the project manager of the Chevy Volt program. To Tony's right is Kathy Zoy. Kathy is currently the president and CEO of EVgo, the nation's largest electric vehicle, public electric vehicle charging company. Boy, looking at Kathy's resume, I couldn't believe all the distinguished positions you've had. She's been president of a number of clean energy companies, including Odyssey and Frontier. Kathy served as Assistant Secretary of Energy for Energy Efficiency, Renewable Energy, as President of the Alliance for Climate Protection, and more. And then to Kathy's right, thrilled to have Dan Steingart, who is the Stanley-Thompson Professor of Chemical Metallurgy in the Department of Earth and Environmental Engineering and Chemical Engineering here at Columbia. His research focuses on energy storage. So as a reminder, you can submit questions for the panel by tweeting us at Columbia U Energy using the hashtag CGEP Summit 2019 and text your questions to 347-621-7399. 347-621-7399. So let me just start out with a few statistics on electric vehicles. Globally, there were 2 million electric vehicles sold last year, 72% increase over the prior year. Here in the United States, 360,000 electric vehicles sold, an 81% increase over the prior year. So the growth in this sector is dramatic, but still it's about 2% of overall vehicle sales. So still a relatively small portion of overall vehicles. Well, Tony, let me just start with you. You had a career at General Motors and in the automotive industry. Can you just help us understand, how do auto manufacturers think about the electric vehicle market?
Well, thank you, David. First, thank you so much for the invitation. I'm honored to be here, and what a fantastic agenda that's been constructed by the organizers of this conference. So it's exciting for me not only to participate as a presenter, if you will, but also to soak in all the great information later. So, David, it's kind of interesting. 13 years ago this month, I was actually appointed as the leader of the Chevy Volt project. We developed a concept car that we delivered at the Detroit Auto Show in January of 2007. And lo and behold, we actually produced the car on time, on budget. During that time frame, however, we all can recall the difficulties as we all passed through the Great Recession, and that has made a mark on the autos here for quite some time, if you will. And the challenge that they have, the good thing is they are no longer in denial. They know electrified transportation is the future. They know people love these vehicles for all of the positive attributes: instantaneous torque, smoothness, refueling at home and in public places. And so they're no longer in denial. The challenge that they face is, when do they put in all of their resources in order to realize what they believe is a business model that can be equivalent to or similar to the profits and the positive cash flow they get on current vehicles? So they struggle a little bit because of the cost of the battery, and we know the battery cost has come down significantly. I work with many different companies, and we're seeing a line of sight to get down to $100 per kilowatt hour. But that's really the challenge that they have, is how do they engage their machine and basically convince their existing business that this business model that's churning all the cash is not the business model of the future, and the business model of the future needs to figure out how to become a positive cash flow entity. But electrification is here, David. It will happen, and there's a lot of exciting news we'll share later on in our discussion.
So just to follow up on this, so overall, you've been involved in this sector for a while. What do you see as the biggest barriers to the growth of the electric vehicle market broadly?
Well, there's kind of 4 to 5 barriers, and I think Kathy can comment on one of them in particular. Is certainly it's the cost of the batteries and associated components, if you will. And we talked about that a moment ago, how that's really dramatically come down. Lots of great innovations occurring to help foster that. Then secondarily, it's infrastructure. And this is infrastructure not at someone's home. Many people don't have a conventional home. They live in a city like New York City, and so we have to provide them charging there. And then for those 1 in 20 trips that are longer distances, that's where Kathy and her team at EVgo come in. Then there's certainly having more models and more choices for customers. We'll talk about that later, I'm sure, as well. And then obviously policy plays an incredibly important role relative to supporting, whether it's through appropriate tax credits, other incentives and the like, support for infrastructure, and then obviously fostering ongoing innovation. And that innovation will cross over to some of the other big trends in automotive, like autonomous, shared vehicles, connected cars. And so it is an exciting time, but there still is a lot of work to be done.
Kathy, so Tony's first barrier that he mentioned was public charging infrastructure. So you run the largest public EV charging company in the country. How do you see this growing? How does electric vehicle charging scale in the years ahead?
Well, it's growing quickly. I mean, as you say, we're the biggest fast charging company in the country now. We are on track to double our capacity by the end of 2020. And we've been around for 8 years. So the numbers that you cited at the opening, David, are about the growth in the market. We do the proverbial Wayne Gretzky thing, which is we try to skate just ahead of the puck. So we are servicing a demand for electric vehicles and sales of electric vehicles just ahead of when that happens. So we work really closely with car companies, with the OEM, and saying, what are your targets? How much are you going to be deploying? We're U.S. focused in the United States. Now, just to pile on to what Tony said, the car companies have announced globally $300 billion of investment to build electric vehicles. $300 billion, and that increased that 3x between March of last year and December last year. I mean, frankly, when Tesla met its numbers last October, every boardroom of every car company in the world said, oh my gosh, he actually really did this. This is really definitely happening. So I think, and what we do is we are, as I say, we're on track to double our capacity. I'm guessing that by 2025, there's going to be 35,000 fast chargers, public fast chargers around the United States of America. That's a dramatic increase. The issue is, I mean, as Tony mentioned, for folks to buy electric vehicles, they have to feel like it's cost competitive. Anybody who's ridden an electric car says this is really fun, the performance is fantastic, and they have to not have range anxiety. So, and again, all of the cars that are coming to market right now have more than 200 miles of range, so that issue is going away. And have to know that if they're on the go, if they don't have a garage, that indeed they're going to be able to charge away from home. So that's what we do. Now, interestingly, what wasn't foreseen probably even a couple of years ago was the rise of rideshare, which is that, again, in 2016, 1% of vehicle miles traveled in the United States were via rideshare, Uber, Lyft. The forecast is that by 2030, that's going to be fully 25% of vehicle miles traveled. Now, why does that matter to what I do? Because if you are a rideshare driver, you drive 5 to 7 times as a personal driver. You drive for a living. You drive a couple hundred miles a day, which means that you need to charge away from home. You need to charge quickly away from home. So I will tell you that what EVgo is doing is we're building for families that have electric vehicles. We're building for fleets that have electric vehicles, and we're building for Uber and Lyft drivers that have EVs that need to charge quickly because every moment they're not driving you around to the airport. So, you know, about a third of our gigawatt hours on our national network last year were servicing rideshare drivers.
So, follow up on this. So how fast is fast charging? I mean, you know, advocates for fuel cell cars will argue that the advantage of fuel cells is you can refill them as quickly as you can refuel a gasoline-fueled powered car. How do you see this technology evolving in terms of fast charging?
Well, again, as Tony would acknowledge, at the moment, the speed with which a car charges is limited by the car, not the charging. So the car, like a Chevy Bolt, the popular sort of most cost-competitive EV out there, we can give it about 90 miles in a half an hour, and it's limited by that size. Now, every new generation of EVs is going to probably have an increased capacity to charge more quickly. So we deploy 50 kilowatt chargers right now because they match the typical car. What we're now installing, though, is higher capacity chargers because we're future-proofing our infrastructure so that when the next generation of cars that can charge more quickly at 80 kilowatts or 120 kilowatts or 180 kilowatts, that we're going to be able to charge it. So what happens now in 30 minutes, you know, in 2 years will happen in 15.
But not all cars have to be fast charge. And there's a bit of a give and take around that because too much fast charging also is difficult for the battery, and sometimes the batteries then are less energy and power dense, et cetera. So it's a delicate balance, and this is why in our discussions here with Kathy and others, it's really a collective effort. We have to figure out what the best sweet spots are. When you're on the highway, you absolutely need fast charging. When you're doing a car sharing application, a ride hailing application, yeah, you need that because you can get the vehicle and the asset utilized, and the operating expenses are so low when you electrify your vehicles. But overnight, you know,
absolutely.
Just plug it in your garage.
I mean, our favorite use case today is we install our chargers in grocery store parking lots because people are going to want to be there 20, 30 minutes to do their shopping. So it's a twofer. You're going to go to Safeway, you're going to go to Whole Foods, you plug in, you go do your shopping, and then you come back out and your car's charged. That's the perfect thing. We actually don't want faster charging, nor does Whole Foods. We don't want 5-minute charging there because that's not enough time to pick up your rutabagas. So, you know, if you're going to pick up a rutabaga. I don't know.
Or organic rutabagas, too.
Dan, another barrier that Tony mentioned is battery costs. You're a battery science, chemical engineer. Tell us, how do you see battery costs coming down in the years ahead?
So this $100 per kilowatt hour number is, when I started my career about a mile north at City College, this was a Moby Dick that even if you can do it for a grid scale chemistry where energy density, the size of the battery and the power density didn't matter, seemed to be a moonshot. In fact, ARPA-E was founded on one of these moonshots. And the question was, could you ever do this, period? And now, seeing battery costs, from what I understand, at a cell level of somewhere between 130 and 160, depending on who you ask and how big your volume is exceptional. And so the rule of thumb we use now when we're looking at it is we assume that the process engineering to make the battery will get done. And the process engineering will cost almost nothing, which is exceptional for a lithium-ion battery because it needs very, very, very good process control. And so when we model this in my group, we just look at the raw material cost. And so if you, this is all talked about in the Wall Street Journal, things like this, If you remove things like cobalt first, and then if you really want to get cheap nickel, you can see material costs on the order of $50 per kilowatt hour. Now, at a cell level. And the question becomes is how long can this battery last? So another vector or decision point in this charge versus distance, charge time versus distance, is how long do you really need the battery to last? Because if you want to have your cake and eat it too, if you want the battery to last a very long time and charge really quickly, you're going to beat it up. But if the battery becomes cheap enough, now even cheaper than $100 per kilowatt hour, maybe you can do both. It seems like $100 per kilowatt hour will happen, and this question of do you have a $5,000 battery that you can charge in 30 minutes, or do you have a $10,000 battery and it'll be rated to go even, so a $5,000, there are a lot of numbers here, I'm sorry, a $5,000 overall battery that goes, say, 150 miles. Because you're trading that extra 50 miles for the ability to charge quickly, right? So the question becomes is how often does somebody drive 400 miles? Not very. How often does someone drive 150 or 200 miles? Fairly often. If you can recover that completely in 30 minutes, and there seem to be pathways of doing that, would the consumer trade the extra 200 miles for that fast charge capability? This matters because the engineering that has to go into hitting $100 per kilowatt hour right now, from what I can see, is hitting this bifurcation point. Do you go for range or do you go for rate? Assuming that you need the battery to last 10 years, 15 years.
What chemistries do you see as most promising, Dan?
So it's going to be, take what I'm saying with a grain of salt because I have equity in companies that are producing some of these components. So I don't have any play on the cathode side, so I can say on the cathode, it will be nickel, manganese, cobalt with a very little bit of manganese and cobalt, this chemistry called 811, because that is simply the roadmap, that's preordained. The question is what's after that, and the goal after that is to get rid of all of the cobalt. It will be for the next few years lithium ion, which means that on the anode it will be graphite, and graphite increasingly mixed with a little bit of silicon. And then the last thing after that is moving to pure lithium metal. The costs for the pure lithium metal play are very hard to extrapolate because no one has produced a cell that actually works yet in a reasonable capacity. For the silicon versus NMC 811, the cost can be as low as $65 or $70 per kilowatt hour at a cell level simply because you're storing so much more energy per unit mass and you don't have significantly even, they're not even semi-rare earths, quarter rare earths. Cobalt isn't that rare, but pulling the cobalt down to 10% can get to these costs. So it's quite exciting.
Tony, I saw you nodding. Any quick comments on battery chemistry from your work?
Well, Dan is spot on. That the lithium-ion family has many, many years of life left. There's a lot of opportunities for improvement. I, too, have an involvement as a board director for a company in the UK that is looking at the anodes and sprinkling in and integrating various elements and silicon into that. We see advances also in electrolytes. We see optimization of the cell when many of these components get mixed together. And then obviously the numbers that Dan and I have been quoting are the cost per kilowatt hour at a pack level. We see even optimization there. I can recall in 2010 when the Volt was launched, we offered a 10-year, 150,000 mile battery warranty. It's performing exceptionally well, particularly around the area of not offering any warranty claims vis-a-vis capacity reduction, et cetera. So that cause was advanced back then, much better than what we experienced with our cell phones, which we turn in every couple of years because they don't have what they used to have performance-wise. So I think, to Dan's point, you'll see continued improvement in so many of the different areas. Is there a silver bullet? I don't think the question is that there's a silver bullet in the next 10 years. But beyond that, there's a lot of interesting, promising technologies.
But the big difference, I think from 10 years ago now, even within the battery community, the 10 years going forward is that the question is this possible? That was the question 10 years ago, and now it is. And it's a matter of what is the minimum viable product and what is the best pathway to market. So the Department of Energy has two programs sort of as I don't want to say a hedge, but sort of say, do we go for range? Do we go for a battery that has this mythical number of 500 watt hours per kilogram, which is about 70% higher than a current cell level energy density? Or do we go for a 5-minute charge? Right, so these moonshots are now really aggressive on not fundamental chemistry. This is what's so interesting about where we are now, but on what the consumer wants, because adoption is key. It's not, is this possible, but what's the fastest route to adoption? Because that feeds into what we've already heard on how do we keep this doubling and how do we get automotive companies to push this to 30, 40, 50%.
Let's jump to electric vehicle policy. And there is currently an electric vehicle tax credit offered by the federal government up to $7,500. It phases out for electric vehicle sales from any individual manufacturer over $200,000. There are proposals in Congress to modify that tax credit. Some members of Congress want to eliminate it completely. Other members of Congress want to go in the opposite direction and eliminate the cap per manufacturer and make it more generous. I mean, Kathy, you've had a lot of experience in Washington, the policy world. What are your thoughts about the importance of the tax credit for the overall market?
Well, look, if you actually believe, as I do, that we need to aggressively address climate change, and if you see that in the United States now transportation emissions exceed the power sector emissions, then we need to continue to we continue to have great resolve on what do we do to accelerate that. Now, if the forecasts are correct that, the growth that you cited at the beginning of EV sales rising very quickly, even so, by 2025, electric vehicles are max 1% of the vehicles in operation on U.S. roads. So we need further acceleration. So the moment to ramp down a policy that accelerates and helps augment sales is not, that wouldn't be a good move. So I, for one, there's a policy that was announced. Debbie Stabenow of Michigan to extend the EV tax credit to add an additional 400,000 car sales to that. I think that would make some sense. And it could even be further. So, look, I think it's a well-designed policy that it's too early to sunset it.
Tony, what are your thoughts?
I absolutely agree with Kathy. Let me offer up 3 additional points. Number one, the tax credit is designed to increase adoption. We're finally getting beyond the early adopters for EVs, and now we're into the mainstream market, and that's where you get your volume, the additional cost reductions, et cetera. Now is absolutely the wrong time to take away a support and incentive piece that would help mainstream customers increase the volume. So that's number one. Number two, we can certainly look around the globe and see the aggressiveness in China in particular, and David, you know that all too well, as well as Europe. I think from a national perspective, we want to develop the market here in this country. And these monies had been budgeted, if you will. We have now 3 manufacturers that are either hitting their 200,000 unit cap or the like, and effectively they're penalized because now when the mainstream market comes, they've used all of their incentive. And so I certainly view that as an opportunity to share what was already previously budgeted, the additional volume for those that aren't willing to produce. So the leaders in this field, the pioneers, then get advantage of it. But again, as I stated previously, I think the big importance is let's make certain this technology is available to mainstream customers, number one. Number two, this is of national interest to us to develop the technology vis-a-vis some serious competition economically, globally. And then finally, let's reward the folks that have been pioneers and leaders in this space, as opposed to penalizing them, saying now that the market opens up, you can't offer your incentives and support, but your competitors can.
So in many ways, the most important policies for electric vehicles in this country have been at the state level, and about half of the electric vehicles in the country, I believe, are in California. Kathy, you're Californian.
Yeah.
Can you say a word about what California is doing on electric vehicle policy overall, and kind of how important is state level engagement on this?
Oh, goodness gracious! More than there's 1 million plus EVs being driven around American roads. More than half of them are in California now, and you know, in large part that is on the back of policy. But what we now see is markets, I mean, Tony alluded to this, markets growing elsewhere. Now, some of that is because of state policy, zero-emission vehicles states. That's where the car companies are now required to sell into Massachusetts and New York and Maryland and the other ZEVs states. But interestingly, and I think we'll be hearing from Governor Inslee of Washington, Washington State is a great market for EVs, and we just opened a station, another big fast charging station in Bellingham, which is, you know, maybe an hour-ish north of where the hub of Seattle is, and that is they have very supportive policies at a state level as well. So it is, you know, like many things that in concert, federal policy and state policy is absolutely helping creating a safe haven for capital, so that companies like mine can invest. I mean, we work in public-private partnerships. We're building the EV charging public network in the state of Virginia. And we competed for money that arose out of Volkswagen's Dieselgate scandal. Some money was set aside, it was allocated to states. It's called Appendix D because of the settlement. There are 4 appendices. This is the 4th one, Appendix D. And the Commonwealth of Virginia decided to set aside $15 million of that money towards public charging infrastructure. We competed for that, and now through a public-private partnership, we are electrifying, helping to electrify the Commonwealth. So there's a variety of tools that states can use and deploy, but absolutely the public policy at the state level is critical for companies like EVgo.
And just follow up on that settlement, by the way. So this is the so-called Dieselgate settlement. The Volkswagen pledged how much money? $1 billion? $2 billion for?
Well, no,
$2 billion for electric vehicle charging.
Well, they didn't pledge. That's a funny verb to use when the courts say you must do this.
Thank you. How's that going from your standpoint? The rollout of that infrastructure.
Well, look, the part of the penalty is that Electrify America, which is an entity that was set up that's fully owned by Volkswagen, is that they have to electrify corridors, like interstate corridors, again, to create that comfort and eliminate range anxiety. That we love the electrification of corridors because, frankly, as a completely private company, that doesn't pencil out for us because the utilization of those corridors tends to be very lumpy and intermittent, particularly given the number of EVs on the road right now. So we need to have, Interstate 80 completely electrified across America with infrastructure every 80 or so, miles or whatever it is. And we love that Electrify America is out doing that.
Dan, I want to come back to batteries and invite you to do a commercial for Columbia University here. We have some people from Columbia in the audience, but many who aren't. And I know there's a lot of work on this type of research going on within Columbia. Could you just talk about what's happening here on battery research and related topics?
Sure. Thank you for the plug time. Really excited. This is my second month at Columbia. I was at a lesser Ivy down Route 95. We, with my colleague Alan West, who's the chair of chemical engineering, we started something called the Columbia Electrochemical Energy Center. And we have 9 faculty focused on making batteries better, from atomic design all the way through power system integration, both for EVs and for grid scale energy. I can't tell you how rare it is to have 9 battery faculty in a single engineering school, and it's almost completely unheard of to do it in an Ivy League school where you'll hire as many fluid dynamicists as you can. But if you have one applied engineer for a given field, that's considered lucky. So we are trying to push for the adoption of electrochemical energy storage, period. And so I use this word a lot because we're beyond the point now where we have to guess what chemistries might work. We're beyond the point now where we should be simply doing material science. We should be doing this. We should be doing fundamental chemical engineering. But we're at a point now where we can work with folks like Kathy and Tony and say, how do we make battery adoption quicker? What are the technical limitations? What are the risks that industry can't bear right now? And how do we push that forward? The Department of Energy has done a great role in motivating some of these questions. I think it's time for universities to start interacting directly with industry to get this done. And through the Columbia Electrochemical Energy Center, we've set up a structure to make it very easy for companies that either make batteries or use batteries or have some aspect in the battery supply chain to work with us to help them get their product out faster. Because getting the product out faster, I believe, will make the world a better place.
So we have a number of questions from the audience. Let me just start with one for anyone who wants to pick it up. Someone asks, are the full life cycle emissions of EVs actually that much better than vehicles with efficient internal combustion engines? Dan.
So it depends on where the electricity is coming from. If the electricity is coming from a well-amortized nuclear plant or hydropower, it's up by Niagara Falls, or a solar farm, wind farm, and the battery lasts long enough, the answer is yes. Life cycle analysis is important, but it's dependent on many, many factors. I think the important question is will it make it significantly better? And if I can draw a line from an electron starting in a renewable fashion to a battery, and the battery lasts, in theory, forever. It doesn't last forever right now, but that's the kind of thing that we're working on. Then the answer is yes, it will get there. And this is a dangerous question because if we look at the raw facts now and we looked at the early stages of batteries, the answer would probably be no. No, it's not as good for a variety of reasons. Can it be much better? Can it be significantly better? The answer is yes. We have to get it done. At 2% of total sales, if the answer was absolutely yes, that would be great. At 50% of total sales, I think by that point the answer will absolutely be yes.
And with the increasing decarbonization of the grid. So
Absolutely,
in California,
yes. That's right.
where we already have a very low carbon intensity grid,
Yeah.
yes is the answer. So.
And when you think aggressively and you think of multiple value streams, and this is a lot of game theory goes on here. You think of something like vehicle to grid, where the batteries make it easier to put more renewables on, then you have this really synergistic effect, and you get there faster. So the answer is yes, we can get there, and we just have to do it to make it happen.
Tony,
that's the exciting thing, though, about when you add in all of these batteries and the battery technology has advanced so far where it can last so long in a car, 10 plus years in a car, still at 75 to 80% of its capacity, then the vehicle will likely have a battery secondary life, perhaps a third life. And when you inject that all into a system where it's already paid for mobile energy storage, as Dan indicated, it's a great opportunity to capture renewables. And then once that capacity is effectively added, you now have the opportunity to not only work on the individual costs on a per unit basis of the battery, but to make money with that battery. Because remember, most of these vehicles are driven 5% of the day. Wouldn't you like to Airbnb your electric vehicle battery and make money while it's plugged into a bidirectional charger? I think it's a tremendous opportunity, and if you look at the growth rate of electric vehicles here going forward, that amount of energy storage that will be added to the capacity of our power system, if you will be impactful. It will open up new opportunities and avenues and new business models, and it will enable other industries like renewables and a whole slew of other businesses to reuse these batteries way before they have to be recycled.
Yeah, let me just, present tense. We, EVgo, already has several stations that have second life batteries, battery banks on site at our stations. And it helps us control when we buy electricity. So essentially it allows us to save money because we purchase electricity at lower cost times and don't trip demand charges where there's demand charges at certain places. But in the future, what we'll be able to do is provide frequency regulation, grid stability services back to the grid again, helps with the modern grid modernization that we're all discussing right now. So it is absolutely, sort of part of our schema as we move forward.
Tony, most auto manufacturers have not been very enthusiastic, I think, about this notion of their vehicles being used for grid support. Is that a fair characterization, and do you see that changing?
Well, auto manufacturers are typically very conservative. That's why I'm the only guy in the audience with a camel suit, so you can find me later if you need to ask questions. But you're absolutely right. They have obligations, and if you think about an 8-year warranty on a battery or a 10-year warranty on a battery in a car, that's better than your normal powertrain warranty. So they're very concerned about this very expensive asset that may have to get replaced. I think over time, there's a number of demonstrations that we're familiar with, David, that I think will prove this out. And then we've seen the business model is executed elsewhere. An Uber driver uses an expensive asset to make money. An Airbnb uses it. And to Kathy's point, we have elements of this, bidirectional chargers that have to be put in place. They can power buildings, let alone do commerce with the grid. So this is where I think some of the challenge of the original question on profitability for OEMs and the like, if they can get more residual value extracted, unlock the value in the battery, I mean, it'll open up a whole new interesting opportunity for investors, for business people, and ultimately for customers.
So our conversation has mostly been focused on the United States. Somebody asks, are there any countries employing EV policies the U.S. government should look to as a model?
Well, David, I know you just did this wonderful study with China, so I think if you should answer that question.
It's a great report. I mean, but it's your report.
I appreciate that. Well, the report was on charging in particular. I mean, it's worth saying, I'll invite any of the panelists to answer, but last year China had 4 times as many electric vehicles sold as the United States. So the Chinese government is very ambitiously pushing out electric vehicle deployment. And I think the highest percentage of electric vehicles in the fleet in the world today is in Norway, which has also had very, very rich subsidies, including waiving of import taxes for cars, which have made a huge impact on electric vehicle deployment in Norway.
Well, last month, Norway finally crossed over where more than 50% of their sales were plug-in cars versus conventional.
All right, we've got the sign for 1 minute, so I want to end with a lightning round of questions, and I'm going to start with Dan. You mentioned the $100 kilowatt hour threshold. And when do you see that threshold being crossed in batteries and mass deployment?
If I knew the answer to that, I would have a much fancier suit. I think so somewhere in the next 5 years at a cell level for sure, and then at a pack level, and this is really going to get into that 8-year warranty. So the battery is going to cost $100 per kilowatt hour at a pack level. Whether or not you will warranty that for 8 years, because now we're getting into the nuts and literally the nuts and the bolts cost. What is the cost of the iron that's slapping the thing together, and the grades there? So soon.
Do you liquid cool it?
Do you liquid cool it? Yeah. I mean, it's now outside of the chemistry. So the answer is we're going to get there. Whether or not that value is taken as is, or more engineering is put on top of it to get to warranty is a separate question.
All right, Kathy, how many publicly accessible electric vehicle chargers will be deployed in the United States by the end of this year?
End of this year, I'm going to go for fast chargers because that's what I think about most. I think we're going to have 50% growth this year, and it'll be about 5,000.
And Tony, how many electric vehicle models will be available for purchase by somebody going out to buy a car by the end of the year?
In the U.S. today, there's over 40 models. That represents about 20 brands. By 2025 globally, and I always want to reference the global reference, there's an expectation of 300 models. So somewhere between 40 and 250 is what we're expecting in the U.S. And let me put in one last plug. This does not include buses, material handling, scooters, electric bikes, and assorted things. And I think that's a very important point to note as we challenge and try to shape the future of mobility.
This has been a tremendous panel. Great way to get the day started. Please join me in giving our panelists a big hand.